Good evening and welcome to Have a Seat with Chris Hansen. I'm Chris Hansen tonight from New York City, and we're taking a little bit of a departure from our usual reporting on predator-like behavior in different aspects of the world. And, well, I guess this is sort of predator-like. We're talking about Tiger King. And unless you were sequestered someplace during this pandemic that continues, you probably saw the Netflix breakout hit involving Carole Baskin, who has an operation down in Tampa, Florida called Big Cat Rescue, and primarily focusing in on Joe Exotic, who's got another wildlife kingdom zoo attraction in Oklahoma City. He's now in jail, and the show, as you know, got into the twists and turns of this entire saga and was just crazy. But one of the things that came out of it and continues to be an obsession for many people, including some in law enforcement, is what happened to Carole Baskin's previous husband, Don Lewis, who disappeared during all this, and no one really knows exactly what happened to him. There have been rumors of a planned disappearance. There has been talk of Carole Baskin perhaps being involved, even talk of Don Lewis's body, his remains being fed to wild cats. Interestingly, Carole Baskin is now a contestant on Dancing with the Stars. And during the premiere broadcast, a commercial ran raising serious questions. Don Lewis's family, his daughters, and his former assistant have retained a lawyer to investigate this matter, and there has been a lawsuit filed. That lawyer, John Phillips, is my guest right now on this very fascinating case. John, thank you very much for being with us. How are you?
Great. Thanks, Chris. Love having a seat with you. Glad it's this kind.
Exactly. You don't want to have the other kind. I should say that I've known John quite some time. A few years back, he represented a client who was the focus of a story we did on Crime Watch Daily, and I got to know him well then and have followed his law practice out of Jacksonville, Florida, Tampa, Florida, and New York City here. And he ended up representing the folks in this case and was gracious enough to talk to us about it tonight. So let's go back to the beginning. John, before you got involved in the case, you knew about the Tiger King, right? You saw the show on Netflix.
We all did, didn't we? So my wife and I were a little bit late to the party. It premiered about March. I think we started watching it in April. And it was one of those, you put the kids to bed and kind of watch like this,
Exactly.
especially as a lawyer. I look back and I had one tweet about Tiger King, just one. And it was, everybody on this show should have lawyered up before going on Netflix. And boy, is it true, today. And so months went by. That was April, May, June, July. A morning in July, I get a phone call from Don Lewis's granddaughter's fiance, a gentleman named Dustin. And they were shopping for a lawyer, trying to figure out kind of a wrongful death angle, just figure out what happened. And at first I thought, okay, well, let's just call back and see if this is a prank. And we spent a week having phone calls with Don's eldest daughter and others, and they came to Jacksonville on Friday, and we agreed to represent them and had a lawsuit filed 2 weeks later and are amending that this week. So it's been a busy, crazy couple of months since we got retained in July, but it's a really important case. And with all the craziness of Tiger King, you got to realize there's a cold case here. There's a family that lost their loving father and grandfather.
After the show aired, John, the Hillsborough County Sheriff, which is the jurisdiction surrounding Tampa, announced that it was reinvigorating the investigation of the matter, asking for tips, and basically characterizing this as a homicide. So it's an active investigation once again. I guess it was never inactive, but the show on Netflix really did breathe some energy into this particular case.
There's an election going on for sheriff too, right now, and so politicians say things to get elected. We hope that was sincere. The family does have a meeting with the sheriff soon, But so when this happened, Carole Baskin, even in descriptions of the missing persons report, they make the missing persons report about 24 hours later. But even then, in her diary entry, she said the officer probably wasted his time, that Don was known to stray, and otherwise really didn't take it seriously. And police go off of that. When the victim's spouse isn't taking it seriously, they tend to say, okay, well, maybe this isn't a big deal. And then a little girl went missing in Tampa right after that became kind of a national story in and of itself. And they never really looked at Carole Baskin and some of the closest people to Don. And here we are 23 years later and trying to re-look at things that should have been looked at decades ago.
You've had a chance now to go through some of this, John, with your team. According to the Netflix series, Don Lewis basically just vanishes. Doesn't leave a note, doesn't say to Carole Baskin, I'm leaving you, I want out, this is where the money is. He also funded a lot of this big cat rescue for her passion, and it was his passion too. But he had a private plane, he had access to money, his vehicle was found near a private airstrip. He could have just vanished on his own, right?
At the time, I think that was more of a viable theory. Now, you got to back it up to, he disappeared sometime or Carole Baskin says she saw him about 6 a.m., 5 a.m. on Monday, August 18, 1997. But you got to back it up to August 15th, that Friday. And Don Lewis's last words to Ann McQueen, his 20-year assistant, was that he was going to divorce, tell Carole it was over. It had finally reached a level that it was over. And at some point prior to that, he had given her an envelope and said, if anything happens to me, give this to the police or open this up. Well, later in September, they realized they opened the envelope and it was the restraining order that Don had tried to get on Carole, saying she had twice attempted to murder. So it wasn't quite just husband disappears. It's a little bit more of a nuanced and complicated story than that. And where his van was found was certainly at an airport, but an airport where he had a fight with the airport owner or some level of disagreement prior. There was a lot. Certainly Don it's our understanding, he had 2 passports. He constantly took trips to Costa Rica and even said that he might go there. But there's been a manhunt, so to speak, for him since then, and no Don Lewis. And he loved his family. He saw his eldest daughter on Father's Day right before that. There was just no explanation for him just to completely disappear. Leaving is one thing. Having no sign of him is a separate thing.
And the reality is, John, and you and I know this from being around the criminal justice system a long time, it is really, really hard for a human being to vanish.
Harder now in the last few years. I mean, that's some of the interesting dissection of evidence. In 1997, gosh, I was switching from college to law school. I don't think I had a cell phone yet, but some people did. I had email, but it was this thing you checked because the professors made you check it. And now with Facebook and Twitter and just instantaneous, something could happen all the way across the world. We know about it in 5 minutes. It would be virtually impossible for somebody to disappear without a trace. And even if they disappeared, for them not to have been found. We've gotten some tips saying, oh, Don's in Nevada, Don's in Costa Rica, but we've checked them all and they're just not true.
What was your reaction? What was the family's reaction when they learned that Carole Baskin was going to star in Dancing with the Stars?
The family's reaction, you see me speechless. The family's reaction is similar to when they realized what Tiger King really was. So they agreed to do an interview, and it's unfortunate, right? It's unfortunate, particularly when the judges make jokes about somebody being sedated and dancing, killing it while dancing. It's entertainment TV, but that they do need to realize that there's a person there. There's a missing person. There's a deceased person, and so they're focused on the silver lining, right? That okay, yeah, Don Lewis is missing, but we're going to put this spot on and take a chance to turn the world, or Tampa, or just one household, whoever it reached, to talk about Don Lewis from this stardom by Carole Baskin. And it's the same thing from Tiger King. Certainly they don't want to be associated necessarily with some of the murder and meth and mystery of Tiger King related to the exotic animal industry. But it did take a moment to episode 3 to focus on Don Lewis. And so as long as the messaging is about Don, they'll at this point take what they can get.
Whose idea was it to buy commercial time on television during the premiere episode of Dancing with the Stars?
Interesting story there. So, we don't really run the lawyer ads. It's not my marketing plan. But our marketing rep in Jacksonville called my office and said, "Hey, you want to run an ad? We got a deal for you on Dancing with the Stars here in Jacksonville." And that's just not me. It's not what I do. But it did immediately start the synapses firing. And so I told Teresa, my office manager, to check into the rates on Tampa, which were substantially more expensive than little sleepy Jacksonville. But we bought Jacksonville and Tampa, drove to Tampa with my own personal creative director and cameras, and filmed it. And I scripted, most of it. The family spoke from the heart, and we just put together a 30-second version and a 51-second version of them talking about Don Lewis, and it worked. It went viral, beyond viral. And it was one of those things, you never know in 2020 or in days of the internet. But my own YouTube video, as there's two versions, but we're over 1 million just on ours, and we've estimated the reach to be 20, 30, 40 million if you count all the references and playing it.
It got a lot of plays, you said, John. We have it here now. Let's take a look at the commercial.
I'm Gail, one of Don Lewis's daughters. We are a real family, and to us, he was Daddy.
I'm Linda, one of Don Lewis's daughters, and we miss our dad.
I'm Donna. I'm Don Lewis's oldest daughter. We need to know what happened to our father.
I'm Ann, Don's former assistant. All we're asking is justice for Don.
Don Lewis mysteriously disappeared in 1997. His family deserves answers. They deserve justice. Do you know who did this, or if Carole Baskin was involved?
A $100,000 reward has been funded. You can call the tip line at 646-450-6530.
Or call our office at 800-LITIGATE. Thank you.
The family makes an impassioned plea in this spot, John, for information relevant to the disappearance of Don Lewis.
Somebody out there knows what happened to him. We think plural. And it's not just, it may not be Carole Baskin. Carole could just completely be innocent except for sensationalism and some deceit related to the power of attorney and things that relate to the estate, not necessarily to creating the need for an estate. But somebody out there knows, and there's a little hope of finding him, finding the remains, but most of it is about finding information. And what better way than 3 of his daughters to come forward and say, look, this is real, this is personal, and any tip means a lot to us. And oh, by the way, there's a chance at a $100,000 reward.
A $100,000 reward, an 800 number has been put up, a toll-free number, which will attach to this show, and people will be able to see it in the information section of the show tonight. How many folks do you figure you reached with this? You bought ad time in Tampa and Jacksonville. I happened to see it the next morning on Good Morning America and thought immediately, wow, that's an interesting idea. I got to call John.
We knew this isn't the first time. I've had hit and run cases and other cases where we've either used earned media, TV media to help spread the word, or traditional bought and paid commercial time. Lawyers really can't run commercials, at least in Florida. They can't run commercials overnight. So I can't shoot something and air it. I got to get bar approval. So we couldn't just do a lawyer ad on it. But the family could do whatever they want. And so without needing bar approval, and this wasn't an ad for me. This was an ad for Don Lewis. And so it was put together. Again, the floor we knew was the Tampa area, and there are these sanctuaries in Jacksonville, and so we kept that in mind. And plus, my office is in Jacksonville, my main office, and so we knew we could reach tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands with the ad, and then we told TMZ and some others ahead of it that it was coming. And they helped spread the viral load. And then once it aired and people saw, like you said, the impassioned plea by the family, it went universal. I mean, it was, by the end of the night, it was on all of the Twitter traffic, big stories. And the next morning, Good Morning America aired it, and it got picked up again. And Howard Stern was talking about it. I mean, it was big. It was big.
Have you gotten any significant tips from that advertisement and the viral nature of what happened next?
We have. So there's two phone numbers essentially in the ad. There's the tip line, and the tip line is run by the Don Lewis people associated with the Don Lewis Facebook group, is what we call Don Lewis Cold Case Files. And they're just this brilliant group. I don't know if you ever saw Don't F with Cats and how a Facebook group helped solve that case. But this is just a brilliant group of guys and gals who found mortgage deeds and signatures and all these things that not only deal with the motive for a murder, but really the fraud and lies. And so that group set up helped set up the tip line, and they got dozens and dozens and dozens of calls. We've gotten dozens of calls. I've got a meeting today, just this afternoon, with somebody who has substantial information, very substantial information related to the case. And so super confidential. I'm agreeing to not necessarily disclose their name, but that's where it starts. And then I've got another one tomorrow. And so it worked. It wasn't just, the floor, which was let everybody be talking about Don Lewis instead of purely Carole Baskin's dancing, but it was, hey, let's get tips, and it worked.
The tips that you're most interested in now, obviously you've got to provide some sort of confidentiality to the people bringing the information in, but how would you characterize the importance of this information? What are we talking about here, John?
Locations to look at, places Don might have visited in the time before his death. The investigation that we're doing is essentially twofold. It's as you'll see back here, I've got a board this way, that way. The power of attorney was clearly fraudulent. She's vowed that it was real, and in their latest motion to dismiss, they say, well, it doesn't matter, it was legally irrelevant because she didn't fully use it. But that was super important. And there's other lies and a trail of deceit that create something. Now, is it murder? Not necessarily, but there was an estate set up and divided based upon certain lies. And then you've got the murder mystery, and most people who are doing the investigation are focused on the murder mystery on a national level. The Facebook group and some other private investigators that are both commissioned by TV media and commissioned by, their own desire to I guess get their 15 minutes or do it for good sake, are focused on both. And so we've just gotten a lot of tips on both. There's so many documents that it's been hard for me to just sit down and go through it all. I mean, I've rented this place in Tampa. It's both an office and my bedroom's upstairs, just to try to be where it's happening and have meetings and not go back and forth from Jacksonville to Tampa.
So this is the war room we're looking at, as it were.
It is. There's the start of one. The whiteboards are real. This one of them is basically the lies, the starting of the lies that we feel Carole Baskin and others have spread. I mean, even about whether Don could read. She needed to make him illiterate for her purposes related to the estate, for purposes related to a potential divorce, that she was the one that really created the wealth and the assets. But I mean, I can show you his high school diploma where he graduated in 3 years. I can show you the cards that he wrote in beautiful cursive to his family, the hundreds or thousands of documents he executed to create a multi-millionaire status from somebody who grew up as a teenager selling manure to rich people that he picked up from cow pastures. I mean, just an amazing story. And then you get into the power of attorney, which his signature is from his marriage certificate. It's either copied directly or traced or both. And Susan, from our lawsuit, this former affiliate of Big Cat Rescue or Wildlife on Easy Street, its prior name, and Susan Arnoff Bradshaw, and Susan said in an answer to our lawsuit that she didn't sign the power of attorney, that she's a victim too. Well, if you didn't witness it, then who did? Well, we don't think it would ever existed in a formal format anyway. But when you start asking questions about a fake power of attorney and will, look, if I have a power of attorney over you and you have a power of attorney over me, those are irrelevant unless one of us are dead or disappeared. And she added the word disappear in this one. And so how can you unlink Don's death or disappearance to this fraudulent power of attorney?
In the Netflix show, obviously there's a great deal of hate between Joe Exotic and Carole Baskin, and there was reason for Joe Exotic to throw shade on Carole about the disappearance of Don Lewis. But in the early stages of this, that letter that was in the sealed envelope that Don had given his then assistant that later went to authorities, that seems like a smoking gun here, no?
It does. And I think Don knew it too. Even though it was denied, he knew it was important for people to see. It was him speaking from the grave in a way, saying, look, if I'm not here, then let this be known. And so that's Don speaking post-mortem to everybody, saying something might have happened to me. I feared for my life multiple times. And then, God bless Anne McQueen. She's a what you see is what you get, sweet lady, and just don't cross her. But she said Don's last words to her were essentially, "I'm going to go divorce. Tell Carole it's done." So you've got somebody being caught up in a divorce, all this nastiness, this power of attorney, and this smoking gun, so to speak, of a man going. And Carole's described it in her diary. She posts these daily diaries that it was nothing or a revenge from a fight. Don was a businessman that used the court system to make millions. He knew what importance truth was because he did real estate deals like tax deeds and foreclosures where he took advantage of the finite parts of the law. Don wasn't going to file a fraudulent pleading for revenge that became court record. That's a whole different level of conspiracy and perjury that nobody would say that he would do. It's just preposterous. But of course, the person that wants to deny that there were murderous threats might say that was fake or out of revenge. But Don, there are many other ways to get revenge than filing a court pleading that says my wife's trying to kill me multiple times.
What would a motive be in this case for Carole Baskin? Money? Control of the big cat?
Oh, money, takeover. So a lot of their fights towards the end, as best as we can tell, and as best Carole will tell us through these diary entries, is that there were fights about whether Wildlife on Easy Street, now Big Cat Rescue, was going to be something or nothing, whether it was going to be profitable by 1997 standards as a roadside sanctuary or zoo or not. Plus you had the real estate business. And so by that point, Don was worth several $1 million, and Carole had only been married to him, 6 or so years. It would have been a challenge for her to recover the amount she would recover in other ways. Again, what proof do I have that Carole did it? None. And we're not saying she did. We're just saying there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and thus we filed the lawsuit to compel her to a deposition to answer those questions.
How much money was at stake here for Carole Baskin?
Actively at the time, there's estimates between 3 to 4 million, all the way up to 7 or 8 million. But you can't really say that even if it's $4 million, $5 million in value at the time he died, the people involved knew his holdings were going to severely appreciate. That land in Tampa where the sanctuary sits now, the unique opportunity to have a roadside zoo or sanctuary, however it evolved, was significant. It was creating power within the state. Politicians, wildlife people, USDA government people were taking interest to what they were doing, and so there's more than just, at the time of death, there was more than just money at stake. It was a building legacy, and it ended, or at least it was taken over and changed into a different direction. And Carole gives a lot of that credit to marrying Howard Baskin and how they transitioned it. But you couldn't have started it without Don buying that first exotic animal.
Has Carole Baskin ever made a statement under oath in this matter?
No. That's what we're seeking to do, and we realize it is unusual. So we filed what's called a pure bill of discovery. We didn't get up there and say we're suing for millions of dollars. We said, look, we're suing for information. And the 3 daughters and Ann tried to compel that. And they filed motions to dismiss and said, look, there's only been a few of these pure bills of discovery filed in Florida jurisprudence, and asked for more information. So I'm right here, 45 pages into their more information, and we're adding some legal counts. We're adding some counts for damages too, to make sure that we move this thing along. Because what's craziest about this, Chris, is you have statements and things done in 1997. Okay, in 1998. Carole apologizes and said Ann McQueen didn't do this. She didn't have anything to do with it. She didn't steal from it, in a written, notarized apology. She settles with Ann McQueen for libel and slander. Again, September 9th, 1998. And now, 2020, she's doing videos reaccusing Ann of all this stuff and saying the daughters and Gladys, his first wife, had something to do with it, and were just terrible people. And she's her I don't know if she killed him, but her worst sin to me right now is just bringing it all back up in very scathing, defamatory ways that how you prove a defense to defamation is the truth. So we get to ask, she's going to have to bring the truth to defend the defamation case, on top of the fraud and the concealment and there is no statute of limitations in Florida for intentional causing death. So all that is in our future with the court case potentially. But to answer your short question, no, she's never had her deposition taken, and that's exactly what we want.
Based on everything you know, and the fact finding is still very much underway, what do you think happened to Don Lewis?
It's tough to say.
But you must have a gut feeling, John.
I do. When a hurricane comes to Florida, one got my house a 3 years ago. When a hurricane comes, there's these spaghetti models, right? And when they start out, it could go anywhere, and it's just like that. And the problem is we have so many spaghetti models, from a meat grinder to a septic tank to a host of other theories that one would easily discount, except for the fact there's been some lies about it. The meat grinder being a household kitchen aid type meat grinder just isn't true. And so we normally say, okay, meat grinder didn't happen, but now we got to deal with this lie. And so we're caught up, but the most plausible scenario is one that Carole actually says Joe would probably do to her on Tiger King. She says that's probably how she was going to go out. It comes from her own mouth. And that's inject her with whether you call it ketamine or, people know it as horse tranquilizer. Obviously in this situation, it's tiger
tranquilizer.
Yeah. But, whether it's ketamine or something similar, it's easy enough to give somebody a quick jolt. If it can tame a tiger, it can get a human. Don was fairly small framed, tough, but small. And while he's out, either overdose him, or while he's out, do enough to him to make sure he's no longer around. And then it's disposal of a body in Florida, where you're in the 90s in a real estate boom and malls are being built. And you got a man that owned a lot of property, that some of that property is still in his widow's name. There's a lot that could have been done.
And there's this dark, ironic theory that maybe he was, in fact, fed to the cats, the tigers.
Yeah, we all want to, the family and I just kind of want to push that off and be like, look, it's sensational. The problem is just there's lies. You've got people that have said that work there, in family, that said they saw a meat grinder that was large enough to tow behind a golf cart, that it was towed behind a golf cart to grind up, large pieces of meat. In Tiger King, you see them haul around basically the quarter leg of a cow, and so it's plausible. But what gets me is the lie, right? Look, if it's true, why tell a lie about it? Why say that it was impossible because you only had a little hamburger meat sized meat grinder? And the same thing about the septic tank. Carole said there's no way Don's buried under this septic tank because it wasn't installed until years later. Well, receipts, right? Receipts. And so the receipts show that it was.
Just why lie about it if it's such a no-brainer?
Right. And it gets into that spaghetti model. Was some of this done to actually create reasonable doubt, or is it just she didn't remember? And I don't know. We don't have to prove, we don't have to DNA test a meat grinder from 23 years ago to show this. We're in a standard. And again, I'm not saying she did this. I hope I come to the conclusion she didn't. I hope we find a reasonable explanation. I hope Don picks up his phone and calls me and says, just stop, I'm good. But you got to deal with probability. And people use the term O.J. Simpson compared to this case. And while there was nobody acquitted or convicted of Don's murder, there's still the civil suit. And O.J. was found guilty of wrongful death. And while the wrongful death statute of limitations is run, that's for negligence. The intentional statute still exists. And so, whoever took Don out didn't do it by accident, we believe, and they would have come forward.
And this disappearance occurred in 1997, 23 years ago. How old would Don Lewis be today?
Gosh, I think I'd have to do the math, but it's in the 80s.
So he'd be into his 80s, theoretically, potentially alive. Is it possible, John, that he was just sick of the cats, sick of Carole Baskin, sick of Florida, sick of his life? He was obviously a self-made guy, had the ability to squirrel away some money, and said, "The hell with you all! I'm going to Costa Rica and live my life."
Chris, I think it is possible, and I think that was the hope back in the 90s. The problem is they've searched everywhere, and if you're leaving, Don had hundreds of thousands of dollars in cashier's checks and in cash. He actually buried cash. He was a Depression-era kid and buried cash in the yard. As Miss Gladys said on 48 Hours, the reporter asked her, did he have it in the banks? Or why didn't he put it in the banks? She said, oh, he had plenty there too. And so, if you're leaving and you're going to do this, where are you going to go without money? And so that's the question. He left cashier's check in his name and left cash, and he couldn't have gone to one of his properties of record because he would have been found. And so it's just, and now it's been 23 years, and his family's been publicly crying and saying, where's Dad? I would hope that he's not that callous that he would leave his family in a lurch like that. But that's why it's a mystery.
If you could ask face-to-face Carole Baskin one question, what would it be?
Are you ready for 8 more hours of questions? Is that fair?
I think so. It's like getting one wish and asking for a bunch of wishes.
That's it.
What do you want to know most from her, though? Seriously.
The power of attorney. The power of attorney. I mean, she's one of the only ones holding out that it's real. And I can look back here. It's on the other side. I keep doing that. The reverse image. Don's signature was traced. The witnesses in our answer said that she didn't witness it. Other witnesses said that witness was there, but she wasn't. Don can't read, but he could sign this complicated legal document. Carole added "or disappearance" to it, which is a one-of-a-kind thing. I've never seen it before. Lawyers are now trying to diminish it and say it's legally irrelevant. There's just thing after thing after thing. Even Carole's own experts back in 1997, I looked at their reports, and they didn't say that it was a trace. They weren't asked whether it was a trace signature or a copied and paste. They really didn't have copy and paste like we have as well, in 97. But what they were asked was whether that was a legitimate signature of Don's. Well, a trace signature, a mimeographed signature, is a real signature. It wasn't a forgery. Nobody said it was a forgery. Nobody signed it. It would have met all the tests of having the loops and curls and things of Don's signature. And so there's just so much about the power of attorney. And again, the purpose of a power of attorney is for somebody to be able to speak for me when I can't speak for myself. That requires somebody to be dead or disappeared or in a coma or in a state where it's relevant that you need a power of attorney. And I can't get past that. And the same thing can be said for the will. The will's in a similar situation. But the questions about the power of attorney, it could have been just a level of, look, I got to leave this man, and I want to have an advantage in the division of assets. That simple.
But based upon what you know about Don Lewis, from his family, from the research you've done in this case, is he the kind of guy who has signed a power of attorney under any circumstances?
For sure. No, Don was very busy. And so Ann McQueen at points had a power of attorney over Don. When you're doing tax deed sales and foreclosure sales and have to run to the courthouse and you're not an attorney, you need to grant some level of permission of your signature. But this one was unusual and excessively broad. And it was almost masquerading as a will. And I don't think he'd ever gone that far, particularly with somebody who 3 months earlier, threatened to kill him, such that he filed a request for a restraining order. That's the other thing that you can't separate. In June, he's trying to get a restraining order. Days before he disappears, he's talking about a divorce, and now this. That he'd give that person all power. It just doesn't make sense.
What do you hope the lawsuit accomplishes, John?
Discovery. I believe in justice even 23 years later, and there's just a lot of questions about what happened. And again, I don't know if we'll find Don. There's people diving in lakes and flying planes and helicopters and doing everything they can to find Don Lewis, and 23 years later, I don't know if you're going to find his DNA, find the body, but I don't think you need to get some answers. And again, referring to the 48 Hours episode, Kenny Farr, who was Don's assistant and then became Carole's assistant, his wife says that Kenny Farr's wife was told before Carole says Don disappeared, that Don disappeared. In other words, Kenny knew Don was gone before Carole, and that he was never coming back. And the timeline there, and maybe it's Mr. Farr that needs the tough questions. Now, mind you, Mr. Farr's hired an attorney that used to represent Ms. Baskin and Big Cat Rescue, so that's interesting. But right now, any answers, it's like drops of rain to a person without water. Any discovery we get helps tell the story a little better and gives closure.
Do you think this case will ever truly be solved?
I'm going to give you the lawyer answer again. It depends on how you define solved. I think there will be, and I believe there will be answers, and I believe we're going to find the person who, to the greater weight of the evidence, did this. Is there going to be a criminal conviction? I hope so, but I don't know that. I can't control that.
There is a $100,000 reward leading for information in this case. How significant do you think that will be? It's a motivator, obviously. Is that the key to solving this?
$100,000 is significant, and I'll add an asterisk to it too. Carole's also previously offered a $100,000 reward. $100,000 reward. She doesn't talk about it anymore. And Joe Exotic, I think, at one point said he had a $10,000 reward. So somebody could. There's 210 right there. Somebody gives me the tip, I might even add to it.
Have you talked to Joe Exotic? Do you plan on doing that as part of this case?
He's communicated to the Facebook group basically to me, and I'm going to meet with some of the people in the original Tiger King. They have information. Joe, and I invite people to listen to the audio podcast too. There's a Joe Exotic Tiger King audio podcast on Wondery. It's super interesting too, and it takes a similar path, but there's more about Joe and this law enforcement informant that he talks to too, that wasn't necessarily fully in Tiger King, the documentary, but I want to talk to him. It goes back, if nothing else, the expression, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I'm not going to go that far. But the enemy of my enemy certainly has valuable information that can help my clients. And so, again, I'm not, there's so many lies and so much to gain, from a PETA endorsement and in the exotic animal world. And there's so much to lose too. If you get on the wrong side of the USDA and the government officials, your animals are gone, which are like family to you. And so there's a lot of people that have been afraid. And so we just want to say, look, pick up the phone. If you tell me not to say anything, I'm not going to say it. I'll hold it as work product privilege, and we can go from there. But Chris, there's a lot of information out there about lies and deceit and manipulation by Carole Baskin and others that may not relate to our case, but there are people that are saying, well, all right, well, I can't help the Don Lewis family, but why in the world is she getting famous off this? Why is she on Dancing with the Stars and now has her own show and other shows are doing, other shows? It's going to be somebody that's victimized her over the years that's going to come forward and start really showing that Carole's not this eccentric, innocent, fun-loving person. She's shrewd, if nothing else.
If anyone watching this show has information about the case, what should they do, John?
Call me. Call 1-800-LITIGATE. Or 904-444-4444 if you can't spell litigate. Try to make it easy, 90 and then all fours. But it's, I want to try to help the family get to the bottom of this. It's super important to them. It's not a TV show to them. It's real.
John, is there anything else you want people to know about this case, about the family of Don Lewis, his former assistant?
No, Chris, I truly appreciate the time. I mean, it really does mean a lot. And you've dedicated so much of your time and talents to getting justice, and to make Don Lewis's family a part of that just really does touch me, and I appreciate it.
John Phillips, thanks very much for having a seat with me on this. If anybody has information, we have all the contacts in this show. You can reach out and get a hold of John Phillips in Jacksonville, Florida, Tampa, Florida, as well as the family of Don Lewis, who continues to be missing 23 years later. Carole Baskin has continuously denied, both in person, in interviews, and through her representatives, any involvement in the disappearance of Don Lewis. We will continue to pursue this story, and I just want to thank you for having a seat with me once again. We will see you next week, if not before. Have a pleasant, peaceful evening. I'll be watching.